and deliver that work as efficiently and effectively, consistently as possible. And to do that, I am a huge proponent of Azure DevOps. Absolutely huge. I love this tool. Very, very comfortable with it. Use it a lot. So up here on the screen, I am showing Azure DevOps. We had a client, Readiness Systems. We worked with, as Joe noted, excellent project, and they said we could share our project profile information with a larger group, and so very thankful to them to share that information. So we'll talk a little bit about Readiness Systems as well, kind of as a thank you to them. But here up on the screen we have Azure DevOps. I'm inside our Readiness project, inside our Marquam tenant for Azure DevOps, and I am looking at my dashboard for the project. And as you'll see, I've burned my project down. We've completed this project. It's all the work has been enclosed for some time, so there's not as much in here as I might have in an active project. But as the there's still enough in here to kind of give you a view of what's going on. And I'll say that my part of the presentation is really more focused on Azure DevOps. That is what I am skilled in and comfortable with. I will transition the work over to Will, who will talk a little bit more about Power BI integration with Azure DevOps and Power BI, and integrating the financial elements of the presentation as well. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Readiness Systems, why this was a good candidate, and how we used Azure DevOps to get their project delivered. So Readiness Systems is a company that sells IoT devices to manage automatic external defibrillators. An automatic external defibrillator, AED, is those devices that assist people when they go into cardiac arrest. And then you may have seen it before, movies or in training, where they take little pads and they stick it on people's chest and they say clear, and then it shocks the individual and it gets their heart restarted. And it turns out that those defibrillators need ongoing, regular check-ins to make sure that they're working correctly. And they don't need a lot of attention, but they do need regular attention. And the challenge that Readiness Systems found is that in the market, while there are individuals and companies that focus on inspecting those AEDs, the reality is that in many circumstances, those the employees working for those companies were not reliably inspecting the AEDs, and there were some gaps in the process, and that resulted in a lot of litigation and challenges for companies that were expected to have those AEDs on hand, which are life-saving devices. And so Readiness built a tool that sits in front of AED and takes a picture of it, and then sends that back to the cloud. And then over here at Marquam, we pick that picture up, and then we do a little artificial intelligence analysis right on that image, and then determine if the AED is in good condition or not in good condition and needs additional inspection, where we can dispatch someone to go take a look at that AED and address what needs addressing. So here we have a little development project. Now we need to bring in some data, pick it up from the cloud, analyze it, and then put it into a dashboard for users to come in and look at their account and say, what's the status of my AEDs? Where are we at? How are the pads? How are the batteries? And keep everything monitored effectively. So really, really neat project. And we came in and said, okay, well, let's get some features together. And so we come over to our backlog. And in the Agile world, a backlog is, of course, now what have I done? This is the challenge with live demos. Hey, okay, here we go. I have another team. That's where my backlog is at the moment. So so I've come into my backlog, and in an Agile world, a backlog is the list of all work in the world that we're aware of, that we're keeping track of. And so that is not closed. It's everything that's backed up. And so here, this is a completed project. And so I have a few deferred defects. These are items that our stakeholder looked at and said, hey, yeah, I mean, technically it's maybe not the spec, but it's a small issue and I don't want to address it. And then we have a few items that we had recorded as potential tickets for opportunities in the future. So you'll see that I have features and I have stories and bugs. And essentially, this is just saying I have the ability to organize my work into a set of big picture requirements, a feature, or even a bigger, an epic. And then I'm going to break those requirements down into smaller ideas, in this case, user stories. And so I could come into a user story and see fairly specific instructions in terms of what is my context, what is the definition of done, when do I know that I've completed this story, and then I can see some discussion with the team or some other relations to other work inside the tool, and kind of keep this as the source of and the definition of all the work that needs to get done all the way down to a requirements level. And we define this as our source of truth. It is our system of record. And I manage the entire development project straight from here, from engagement with the stakeholder. I come in, I work inside Azure DevOps, and if I give them access, and if requirements aren't defined in here, they know that they're not getting done. um, and it's live, so there's no passing emails back and forth. There's no email requirements being lost in inboxes that someone didn't communicate. All the requirements are built live inside Azure DevOps, communicated with the stakeholder directly in Azure DevOps, and communicated directly to the development team directly in Azure DevOps, connecting that whole requirements chain and making sure everyone's on the same page and all the requirements are captured and there's transparency in what's been captured. So we can also look at our backlog from the context of a Kanban board. And for those of you that don't know what a Kanban board is, it's just in the olden days, it was sticky notes on a wall that you moved from lane to lane across the wall. You moved a sticky note, which was an idea of a requirement, and you moved it across the wall. You said, hey, what's the status of this requirement? And so here I have my board. I have a couple items, those two stories and the future items, and I could move them into active development. This was a pretty simple board for us, and then move them into resolve when they're done and close them out after they've been validated. So they can just be moved across the board as people are working on them. In this case, we'll put that back where it belongs. So meaningfully, I'm able to track all of my work. Oh man, once again, this is what happens during live demos of old work. Try it. Well, I'm not going to configure this during a live demo. That's fine. Let's just carry on. But what I would have loved to have shown is that I'm tracking my work on a sprint by sprint basis. So I build all of my work into 2-week sprints, and I do that very, very intentionally. It's very helpful in terms of consistency and clarity and velocity management with the development team. Velocity being a very important concept in software development, where we're saying, hey, we have resources working on this work that are also very expensive resources, and I want those resources to be as productive as possible. And velocity is a measure of our overall productivity or our output. And there's just because we have people working on things doesn't mean they're working optimally. And my job is to utilize Azure DevOps and good communication to ensure that the team is working optimally. But we also organize our work into sprints to manage that velocity, to make it optimal. And part of that is that we commit to a set of sprint deliverables. So we say, what work can we deliver in a 2-week period? We commit to that and we deliver it every single time. And that's part of how we establish a relationship with our clients and reliability. And then also, if there is ever a challenge for whatever reason, we're able to stay right on top of our project. We find out very, very quickly that we're starting to fall behind, or that there's issues or there's challenges. And we don't find out that the project is delayed when we're 6 months in to a 8-month project, or a maybe you've been here before, 6 months into a 6-month project, that you find out that you're 4 months out still. That is a miserable place to be. So getting those really small commitment timelines, and really breaking the work up into um, good, meaningful chunks, communicating what we're committing to, uh, and communicating that to the stakeholders, communicating that to the development team, very, very positive way to build um, good velocity and get work done as at the end of the day. Azure DevOps is a really powerful tool in terms of organization. And so I've come in here, I've built a set of queries to analyze how I am looking at my backlog. And so I don't know, we can come take a look at my issues. And I've built a query with kind of an assisted language set here from Azure DevOps that lets me come in and specify a whole host of different fields that I can analyze my backlog by, not even just my backlog, all of the work that I ever accomplished, and use some logical operators and get a list of output to kind of find out what's going on. So let's say I wanted to come in and say, there's an area of the project that I worked in, with readiness. We did some work in the cognitive space, machine learning to identify those dots on the AEDs to determine if they're working. And I could come in and sort by area path to kind of look into area path. Come in and I could define my area path and say, hey, what part of the project is associated with that cognitive service processing. And so I could set up Azure DevOps to accommodate that sort of search profile so I can see all of my stories or features or epics associated with that type of work. So very powerful. Also, I've integrated several different extensions into Azure DevOps. One of them that I found very powerful, particularly in COVID world or remote work, is Estimate, allowing me to do all of my estimating directly inside Azure DevOps and facilitating that sort of remote engagement. Getting good, powerful communication back around our feature t-shirt sizing, story point estimating if we're doing that, and then task estimates, all driving that through, putting it back into the backlog, sorting, evaluating that information so I can make sprint plans. It all ties in together. I deliver software. That's what I do. And I work with the development team in this space. I live in the boards because, hey, I'm a product owner. And I report. So, hey, I live in my dashboard as well. I communicate how is the project going? What's the status? What are our tests looking like? How are we doing? Is the project working as expected? This is good. This is a project. Software is being delivered. Developers are actually working in the same space too, where the repos are where we store our code, pipelines are where we're actually deploying out to our production environments, test and development environments. I've got QA working in test plans, and artifacts is another development related item. So I don't go in there much, but I do look at my backlog. I do look at my dashboard. I do deliver software. This is all very good. And then I get a project manager that comes to me and says, Samuel, thanks for thanks for delivering software, but I've got a report on how we're doing, where are we at? And I can say, well, on some level, if you just want to know about the project, you can come in, you can self-serve. It's all here. You can see where we're at in the delivery of the project. I can go query this. I can set up queries. I can work with that PM. But importantly, this is where Will comes in. We sit here and we say, well, I track my time in a tool that Marquam has called Hourglass. I'm sure most other companies have something similar where I'm putting in my hours, I'm putting in my time codes, and I'm recording what I'm up to, where my time is going. And to that end, that starts to integrate the financial element of this discussion. And so all of my developers are all doing the same thing. I'm working with them to make sure that we capture our time. And I'm not tracking that inside Azure DevOps. We're tracking that in another tool external to Azure DevOps. So even though I can report on this, great, I have management that's coming down and asking my PM, well, where are we at with the budget, and what's our earned value management look like? And so this is where Will comes in. He has integrated into Azure DevOps and pulled up these analytic views and hooked into that. So I'm going to transition this over to Will, who's going to talk about Power BI.
All right, thank you, Sam. Just give me a moment to pull up my screen. All right, so as Sam was talking about, I mean, he's managing his project. He's living in that Azure DevOps world. But again, there's some larger business questions, such as where are we at in terms of budget on the project? How much are different features costing me? What's the ROI? All those kind of questions that might live where the data for those answers live in different systems. And so we need to kind of combine that information to come up with those answers. And it's not really feasible for the project manager to always repeat that analysis and pull data from different sources and mash them up just to provide those answers. So I just want to give a brief overview of the report, then I'll kind of get into how we connected to DevOps, how we set up the data model, all of that, how we came across some of those problems where maybe systems didn't tie directly into each other, but we could estimate around that. And then I'll kind of talk about what's the further use case with these Power BI models. So just to give a brief overview of this report right now, what we have is just kind of an outline and just to kind of give you some ideas of what's possible. We're still internally kind of working through what we want to have as a kind of dashboard that other business managers can go to and view so they don't have to go directly into DevOps and figure out how to navigate DevOps if they don't have experience. But just what we have right now over on here on the right hand side, we kind of took our consultants' hourly rates from our timekeeping system for this project, and then what were the what features and tasks were they assigned to, and what were the estimated hours on those tasks, and kind of came up with a cost. And then we kind of are comparing that to the original estimate versus what is our kind of running total on those remaining work hours and how many have been completed. Just to kind of get an idea of where was our budget spent. And then if you wanted to drill into something, you can. You can drill down to, we went from feature down to user story, and you can continue to drill down that kind of hierarchy. One thing to note up here is a slicer. We have the state of that feature. So if this was an ongoing project, you could even go to features that have not been closed or are new and get kind of that estimated cost and then see, well, how much budget do I have left? So you can kind of do that comparison of do I need to start picking important features to focus on, or do I need to groom this backlog and remove some features that I'm not going to be able to add to the budget. Over on the left-hand side, we just have some quick cards. So from our timekeeping system, what was the total project budget? How much have we consumed already? What's the remaining? And then just some information from DevOps, so the remaining tasks, and then something that might be useful for kind of understanding how much time you have left, what your burn rate is by week. So how many dollars are you burning on this project weekly? And then we have some blank spaces, and I'll kind of get back to that after I kind of explain how we did this. So first, I'll kind of go over connecting to DevOps. So what do we use to connect to DevOps? We use the OData feed connector, and that's really because it's a single project, so there wasn't a lot of data from DevOps that we're extracting. If you're trying to pull like organization-wide metrics, you're gonna have to kind of write your own queries that kind of do those pre-filters. This is kind of the string that you would put into that OData feed. And there is a built-in DevOps connectors, but that doesn't pull in all the information related to your project. It's only good for certain boards. So we decided not to go with that because it was just less less flexible. So we wanted to pull in everything about our project, and then we could decide what was important and what measures we needed to build. So what permissions do you need to actually connect to your project? Well, whatever account that you're authenticating against needs to have basic level access or higher to the project. And then you just need to turn on the analytics view in the preview feature. And how you do that is on that account's profile, you go up to the user settings, you go into the preview features, and you just turn on this analytics view at the top. All right, so if we move back over to the report, I'll take us into Power Query. So connecting to DevOps, I'll give you a quick example of how we did that. We went to the OData feed, and then I have a note already with the URL. So it was that URL that was on the slide, and then your organization and the project that you're trying to connect to, and where you find those in DevOps. If we go back to that window, it's just right after the main URL. So we will grab this. We'll come over and we'll paste it in. And then once you've connected to DevOps, you'll be presented with a lot of options for different tables that you can connect to. We pretty much just pulled in everything, and then we did some slight modifications to help set up our data model. But if you're looking for anything, it can be found within these different queries. So as you can see over here, this is our source from DevOps. We have some queries that are sourced from Hourglass. That's our timekeeping system, and I'll just kind of show you what that looks like really quick. So Hourglass, this is from my perspective, but it's where we input our time as consultants, and then also project managers can go in and do some forecasting and scheduling. So that keeps track of kind of what work we've done, what work are we planning to do, and then also has all the financials related to that. The other data source that we brought in, it's not being used in this report, but it is Optic. And this is just a Power App that we built that allows us to give a daily estimate of what we think we're going to be spending our time on that day. And then we also have some SharePoint sources. And then down below, you can actually see some parameters. And that's what kind of makes this report a little more reusable in the future. So if we go to the source for the actual DevOps, rather than just typing in the string URL that you see at the top, we pulled out the organization and the project name, and we turned those into parameters so that if we needed to shift which project we're looking at, we can. And just as a quick tip, an easy way to do that. Ooh, where did my, there we go. An easy way to do that is to, after you've already set up your queries, you can go into data source settings. You can go to change source. And then from here, you can break up your URL by adding parts and then selecting whether you want to add a text part or a parameter part. Those get combined into a single URL, and then that's what's used as your data source. So that's just a quick tip to help you kind of parameterize your data sources after you've already done some development work. So we're bringing in all this information. So how do we set it up? So what we've done is when you connect to DevOps, all the work items come in through a single table. We decided to go with a little bit snowflaked out so you could get those hierarchies so we could drill into from feature down to user story, down to the actual work items themselves. So we have a query for work items. We have a query for epics, features, user stories. And then again, we did that for the board locations just so that we can break those out and view them individually. So what does that look like on the data model side? So what we have our epics, the epic board locations. They're joined to our features. Um, we have our feature board locations. These are just some extra SharePoint information that we decided to add. We have our user stories, their locations, and then we have the work items, and mainly reporting on those sprints and everything at the work item level. So that's why you see a lot more dimensions tied into those to that table. Over on the right-hand side, how we're actually joining our DevOps information to our forecasting information is actually just through the users. So that's one thing to point out is that we did not have a clean key to kind of join work items and work items within the project to specific time codes and whatnot. So what we're doing in order to gain those kind of financials is we're taking who's assigned to what tasks and what were the hours estimated. And then if there's anything more general, like the budget remaining or the total budget of the project, that's just coming directly from our hourglass system. All right, so as you can see, um, this gives us a lot of insight, but I would say that the main benefit of kind of having a Power BI report set up for your DevOps analysis is that it takes all those questions that you might get frequently, and it turns them into a repeatable a report that kind of automates that whole analysis section. Another benefit is that once you kind of have this report laid out, it's really easy to then extend your analysis either through adding more information to the report. So, for example, uh, maybe we're curious about how many more weeks in terms of tasks do we have based on our burn down rate versus how many weeks do we have left in our budget based on our burn down or burn rate. So, if you wanted to look at something like that, it's just really simple to add new calculations. Um, if you're familiar with JAX, you can add them into the report itself. So we are going to do weeks, um, budget remaining. And if you've set up your data model well enough, you'll already have some calculations to rely on. So we have our remaining budget. Want to know how many more weeks do we have left? So we're going to divide by our weekly burn rate. And then we can bring this measure into the report. Just very quickly. And we can format that as we want. Maybe we don't want the decimal points. We just want a full number. And you can kind of change that logic as you want. I also have one for the amount of tasks we have left based on the burn down rate. So now you can do some analysis of maybe we have a lot of work in our backlog and not enough budget to be able to get through those. So again, maybe you need to start doing some prioritizing or whatnot. Another useful tidbit about once you have this kind of data model set up is that you once you publish it to the service, you have a one-stop shop to kind of continue your analysis, even in other reporting tools. So as an example, once I have this published up into Power BI, I can actually go to the data set. I can click Analyze in Excel, and I've already kind of started setting one up, but you'll be connected to kind of this pivot table that's actually being driven by the exact same data set that's driving your Power BI report. So you can pull that information into Excel, and you can even do some more ad hoc and in-depth analysis inside of Excel. Another benefit too is, say we wanted to change projects. If you set those parameters up, you can just go quickly to the transform data section, and then you go to your edit parameters. And now if we change these names, don't have a project to demo this, but for all the projects or the parameters that you've set up, you can just quickly change them, hit OK, and then your entire report will reflect whatever project you choose. So I hope this gave you kind of just a brief overview of what's possible. I think it's how your data model is going to be set up and how you want to actually calculate some of these measures and display the report is going to vary based on kind of your setup. But hopefully this gave you some things to think about. All right, I'll pass it back over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Will. Actually, I want to invite on my colleague, Aaron Moore. Aaron, if you are available.
Hi, guys. Can you guys see and hear me okay?
Coming through loud and clear.
Okay, good. So hi, everybody. I am Aaron Moore, and I'm with the sales team at Marquam. And you just heard Samuel and Will give you a good description of the what, and I am basically the how. So how would you move forward? And I think the biggest takeaway is to think about when we connect with different clients or different people within organizations is what you need to ask, like, where are you in the context of moving forward? Are you in as far as Power BI? What does the licensing look like? Who's on your teams? Because our job in sales is to make sure that we are able to customize a path forward. And so when I talk to new clients, if you're somebody who wants to see this in their organization, we would have a conversation to figure out what deploying Power BI would look like. And there's a bunch of different questions we want to have answered before we can do that. And hopefully today you were able to see with Samuel and Will some of the possibilities. But we do have obviously in-depth experience with Power BI, with Azure DevOps, and that can trickle into a lot of different things. And so we just want to open the opportunity to reach out and to move something forward, and know that in my role, it's just finding out the best path forward within all of these technologies and going in a little bit deeper with what you guys learned today. So just an invitation to have some conversations, an invitation to learn how maybe this could impact where you're coming from. And sometimes that's just even talking to your boss and figuring out, how can we help you move the conversation forward, not necessarily even the technology. So thank you for giving me the time to say hello, and definitely reach out if this is of interest, or if you just want, like I said, helping the conversation get moved forward as well as the technologies.
Thank you, Aaron. I want to invite the people on the call, if you have a question, to feel free to throw it in the chat. While you are doing that, I want to ask a question of Samuel. So what is the long-term vision for this solution with our executive team?
I appreciate you asking that, Joe. Really, as I sit here and I work in this tool, most people that know me know that I geek out over all the details in here and everything I can do to set up my project. Or I'm working on multiple projects at the moment where I have multiple projects all inside the same Azure DevOps space. And how do I manage that and keep everything straight and organized and clear and deliver? And while that's exciting and fun for me, I recognize, and actually everyone else recognizes a lot more, that not everyone wants to be inside Azure DevOps. And particularly, a lot of our businessy folks, they want to be able to say, I want to go to one space where I just get the information that I need that I can bring in from across the company. And so what Will has started to do here for us, I say started, I mean, he's also finished, but there's a bigger vision, which is let's enable a single dashboard where we can come in and integrate all of our enterprise data into a single place where no one has to go into any of these technical tools or like Hourglass. All of those time reporting tools are all the user experience is always terrible. And that's nothing against Hourglass, but it's never a great experience. And so Power BI is such a opportunity to have a clean front that just lets you dig into the data and bring everything together. And that's definitely the vision. It's kind of like, yeah, there's people like me that are here that I deliver my portion, but we could really provide a one-stop shop for everyone that needs to do the managerial aspect of this. And then reporting out to our stakeholders. Yes, I work with a stakeholder directly in Azure DevOps to get all the requirements established. But typically reporting out to CFOs or CTOs or CEOs, that executive suite always wants a one-pager, just give me the details. And one of the things we're always struggling against is, well, when you send something in email, it's static and it doesn't live, and it's by the time it's sent, it's no longer accurate. And so being able to push out a live Power BI source that then allows the drill downs, it gives that one page, but it also it's current, and it really lets you associate all of the relevant data so that when your CFO has a question, they just come in and they say, well, I want to learn more about this, and they just click, and great, now all of a sudden we can open the rest of the world up. And that is powerful. That is really, really powerful.
Great, thank you, Samuel. There's actually a question in the chat here. If we have our business as waterfall and IT as agile, how can we use this?
Yeah, so that is inevitably the challenge. And so, there's I would need to know a little bit more about that specific question. I've worked in that environment before, and essentially what I was doing in that scenario is delivering all the requirements from an Agile perspective, but simply reporting out in a waterfall capacity. However, Azure DevOps can actually be set up to support waterfall, and in that case, you would set up a separate project designed to operate in the waterfall mentality for that project. Where another opportunity for us in this case is that if we run the project in an agile capacity, when I'm doing agile development, I'm focused on what's the highest priority, and I'm really not as concerned about things like critical path. I don't want to say it's not relevant to me, but and I'm not building 90-day plans. I'm very focused on what's in front of me in Agile, but it doesn't mean that I can't say, hey, I'm going to deliver that way, and then we'll step back for anyone in the business, and I kind of I have multiple ways where we report out of Azure DevOps, and we just say, hey, what does the 90-day plan look like? Okay, fine, I'll give you a 90-day plan. You want a critical path? All right, I'll just refactor my my prioritization into the current definition of critical path. So it's not necessarily ideal because you're marrying two worlds that think very differently from each other. But you could set up two different projects if you want tickets to actually technically manage both separately. But if you want to do inside the same project, waterfall and agile, then you're going to have to choose one, and that's how you're going to manage it. And really, that just means that you're not agile anymore, is really what it amounts to. So.
Thank you, Samuel. Great answer. There is another question in here, Will, you might want to take a shot at. So I know it's a little bit out of scope, but any ideas on integrating project and Azure DevOps / Power BI, or if Microsoft Project can be connected via OData / queries? Do you want to take a run at that? What is the limits here on what can be connected?
Yeah, so there's a ton of connectors in Power BI, typically there are very few data sources that can't be connected to. I actually found, I'm posting it in the chat. So for Microsoft project, that's they store the data in Microsoft's Dataverse. So that article towards the bottom kind of explains how to go connect to that, those tables. But just with this project, or anything in Power BI, there's not really a limit to what can be connected to and pulled into your report. As long as you can connect to that data, you can pull it in. The trick would be figuring out how to find useful ways to group and relate information between the sources together. That's not always straightforward, but if you run your projects where there's an easy way to tie out to another system, such as like a time code or something, um, to a specific task in your DevOps or your projects or whatever that is, or maybe you're just doing it through the person working on that task rather than trying to actually manage to that tiny scale of detail, and put that burden on your developers. There's a way you can probably find to use some statistics or some estimating to kind of get you close to what you're looking at that you probably would have had to do anyways, if you're doing the ad hoc analysis. Just now you're kind of defining what that estimate entails and how you're going to repeat that process.
Great, thank you, Will. As a follow-up, when Samuel was talking about the long-term vision here, you mentioned kind of a unified dashboard for executives. What, Will, do you see as kind of the next important features from Power BI in that vision, and where this potential project could go? And Will, you may be muted.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. So some of the kind of long-term vision for just other features and kind of Power BI that are useful, is once you have that data set up in the service, you can connect to it with other reports. You can share it out with your executive team. It's in the reports that you create. You can share with them. They're kind of in a central location. There's other features such as goals you can set up, and kind of drive towards some kind of target on your data. And then again, you can connect to those data sets with other reporting tools. So if you have something else that you need to also present that information in, you can connect to it through the XML endpoints. And then another option too is you can embed reports themselves into SharePoint sites. So there's a lot that you can do to kind of make it easier to find, and easier to find and access your information.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. I want to invite folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. This is a great opportunity to ask questions about Azure DevOps or just generic Power BI. But while waiting for questions from the folks on the call, Samuel, I have another question for you. So how has this product changed your analysis as a product owner and as a Scrum Master? Like, what's the real value add here for you? Samuel,
Yeah. I mean, okay. So the biggest value add is that trying to run an Agile project using Excel or sticky notes is just miserable. So here we have a tool that it makes a live space that we can legitimately use as a real system of record, and we can have live conversations about everything directly in one space. And so I would say, like, a prime example is I have no requirements kept in email, none, period. So it's not possible for me to be out sick and for someone to not get my requirements because they're hosted in a live environment that everyone else is sharing. And so to have that connected space that is, it's like a war room, but for instead of for marketing, it's for development. And this is where the work gets done. So once I found Azure DevOps, which previously I was managing from Excel, that was it was rough. It was really, or Microsoft Project, which really is a waterfall oriented, even more rough trying to run an Agile project. So Azure DevOps is just, I live it, I breathe it, because it enables success, in my opinion. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And again, questions from the audience. We still have another about 8 minutes left in this call. So if you'd have something that you'd like to ask of our team, feel free to throw it in the chat. Will, I have another question for you. So let's talk about data limits here. Is this limited to just financial data, or what's the scope of capabilities here and applied in a more broad situation?
No, it's not just limited to financial data. I mean, if you have an ERP system or a CRM system, as long as you can connect to that that data, and you have an account that can, then you can also bring in any information just tied to the entire kind of life cycle of whatever features you're trying to add to your project and whatever development work you're doing.
So if you had a scenario where there's like a customer voice and customers are saying, hey, build this feature for me, you could map that out to the user voice, to the expense, to the construction, and give a good estimate on all that cost coming out of it. So it's a very, very powerful tool there. And Will, you started to kind of touch on it, but could you highlight again, what are the complications here for people on this call? What are the things they need to be concerned about as if they try and build the system themselves? What is not a good fit from a data perspective in this scenario?
Not a good fit is probably when you have systems where you don't really have good keys to kind of relate information between those two systems together. I'm gonna be curious how you're doing your analysis if you don't, but that would be the scenario where it'd be tough just to kind of figure out kind of a systematic way to relate, hey, what is this charge time relating to in this project? There might be more broad questions you can still answer, but those specific details will get really hard to come to a solution for.
Great, thank you. Last opportunity, folks, for questions for this team.
You know, Joe, there was a comment earlier that I'd like to address. I realized I didn't hit on. I'm going to share my screen again really briefly. Hopefully this is the right one. There was a note that someone's needing to set up a project or set up Azure DevOps with multiple different projects. And Azure DevOps is really, really effective at running multiple teams together. So if I come into a feature or story task, any one of my items, of course, now, okay, there it goes. I'm able to specify an area path and an iteration path for each of my work items. And I can assign different teams to different area paths and iteration paths so that their board and their backlog reflects those areas that are relevant to them. And then that allows us to summarize all of the work for this project into a single report, even though I may have 4 or 5 or 6 different teams that are all working on it. So I utilize area paths to define the different functional areas of the project, and I use iterations to define anything that's time related in the project. And so this is super, super powerful in terms of saying, well, hey, I have an IT team that's doing some sort of data migration, integration pipeline, and I have a team that's building a front-end UI, and I have a team that's really focused on an API, but I want to put all that information into the same space without overloading any individual team with stuff that's not relevant to them. And so I can set up those different teams and then assign them the area paths and the iteration paths that are specific to them, and then still get that unified reporting at the end. All still inside Azure DevOps, which then that also makes it very easy for Will to pull out and then add the remaining financial pieces into. It's really that's pretty slick, and there's a lot here, but it's very powerful. So.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Samuel. And since there's not any remaining questions, I want to say thank you all to coming. In particular, I want to say thank you to Samuel and Will for their time today and for sharing this wonderful project. I hope it's been valuable for all of you. Again, please take a look at our upcoming trainings. They're on Marquam.com's website, marquam.com/events. A couple of trainings still coming up through this next month that you might find very valuable. But with that, I'm going to give you back the last few minutes of this hour. And thank you all for coming. We'll hang out until about 1:05 or so. So if you'd like to stay on to ask any final questions, you're welcome to. But with that, thank you again for everyone.
Thank you.